Hey, we're your hosts.
I'm Charlotte.
And I'm Jonathan.
And we believe that one of the most valuable gifts you can give to yourself is the gift of wholeness through integrating all aspects of what it means to be human.
And in this podcast, we're bringing you insight, information, and inspiration to move from a stressful to stress-free life.
Your journey to becoming even healthier and happier starts right now.
Welcome to Wellness Theory, the podcast.
Hey everyone, we have a treat in store for you today. Thank you for tuning in and joining us. We're delighted to introduce you today to Jenny Devonshire. So Jenny is the founder of Pause to Perform, which is a complete corporate wellness solution for optimizing employee health and performance based in the UK. She's completed 2 degrees, one in psychology and the other in sports psychology, and is passionately drawn to the topic of imposter syndrome, so much so that she's completed her master's on it as well. And that's what we're going to dive into today, imposter syndrome, and how we can overcome our imposter monsters, as Jenny likes to call them. So welcome to the show, Jenny. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
So listen, let's dive straight in. Like, why imposter syndrome? I know it's something that really stresses people out. Clients that we've worked with often is in the mix with other stresses in their life, and this innate feeling of perhaps not being enough or really quite cutting it. So why imposter syndrome?
Well, I think like with a lot of these things, it's from personal experience. So it was a massive issue or a massive struggle in my life. Funny enough, even though it's like it is rife in academia, I didn't really have it at uni. I don't know if it's just because I was younger or but yeah, it didn't really, I never was never aware of it. It was only when I went into my fitness career that it's kind of, I didn't realize what it was. I thought I was just an imposter. So I did my I was working in the corporate world, knew I loved fitness, and I thought, why don't I make this my career? So I did my initial personal training qualification, but I didn't feel confident enough to go into it. This is where it all started. So I delayed it for a while. I started teaching like boot camp classes and things like that. And then I finally took the plunge and got a job at Virgin Active. And this is when I really felt it. So I never felt like I knew enough. I never felt like I was a good enough trainer. So I had all this self-doubt. Everyone else told me I was really good. I got really great feedback from my clients. But then I started doing like, there's different ways people sort of deal with it. My way was to do courses. And so I did course after course. So first of all, I was working with a lot of people with back pain. And I was like, oh, I don't know enough about anatomy. I don't know enough about this. So I did my Pilates qualification. And obviously that did massively deepen my knowledge of anatomy and everything like that. But I still like, but I don't know enough. And then it went on and on and on. I did course after course. I did my pre-postnatal, still didn't feel confident enough. So I did like an advanced one. And it just kept on like this. And I thought, oh, when I do this course, then I'll feel like I know enough. And it was a constant thing. And like, I had people telling me, I've got someone who I really respect. She's did sports therapy at university, and so in my eyes, she like knows everything. She's like amazing, and she'd be like, "You're so good. You just don't believe in yourself." And yeah, it just went on, and it's like so much stress around it. I got promoted to master personal trainer. I got offered jobs at all the top clubs in London that I applied to. And it was just this belief that I wasn't like, I fooled everyone, which is very common in imposter syndrome. It's like they just don't know that I don't know what I'm doing. And so that made me like quite interested in it. And then during the pandemic, I decided to do a master's in sports psychology, just on a whim, basically. I just thought, oh, it'd be interesting. And we had to do like a final research project, and we could pick any topic. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to turn something that has caused me a lot of stress and anxiety into like a positive, and I would really like to kind of get to understand it a little bit more. So I created an intervention study working on reducing imposter syndrome, or imposter phenomenon as it really should be called, but I find that word really hard to say. And so so basically I studied it for like basically a year, reading loads and loads of papers just to kind of to grips with what it was. And so that led me to where I am now, working with people to help them reduce their experiences of it.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing, because it's something that is so common. I think I read a statistic, something like 75% of women specifically, this study was all experiencing imposter syndrome. And I don't know what that number is for men, but I'm sure it's not too far off. And that's just based on what I've seen firsthand. from working with clients and stuff as well. And it's amazing to me the excellence that the people that I know have experienced it significantly are playing at, yet they have this like complete opposite picture of themselves. And I know from my own experience as well, it's like a bit like you, I didn't really know what it was. I just thought it was just the way I was, and it was just like a me thing. I didn't know it was a syndrome or a phenomenon at the time. And it showed up for me when I was getting promoted in one particular job that I was in. I remember coming home and saying to my other half, I've been asked about this job and if I would like to do it. Like I hadn't applied for it or anything like that. And it was like, I've been asked about this job. He was like, amazing. Yeah, he goes, you'll smash it. Like, that was the first thing he said. And like all the way home in the car, I'd been thinking, is it because I'm female? Is it because I'm English? Is it because I'm a convenient choice? Da, 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 da. And there was just this story going off. And it was just like, huh. And I think it was in that moment when I actually just realized, okay, what is this thing? Like, what is going on within me? The fact that he had that response so quickly, and my own internal dialogue was just sending me like down this route of self-doubt. And it was at that point where I was like, okay, what do I do here? Do I just kind of go with it? It's a great opportunity. And I very much love what Richard Branson says, like say yes and figure it out and like as you go, or figure it out after. So I was of that mindset, and I just kind of went with it. And I think had I have known about imposter syndrome, one, maybe I would have been able to do something to prevent it before it got to that point. But two, perhaps I would have had the complete opposite of Richard Branson's quote. Perhaps I would have actually gone down that rabbit hole further and said no to the job. Fortunately, I said yes. So I didn't feel like it really impacted me that much. But then I started to wonder, okay, well, what else is going on behind the curtain? And that's where kind of I started to really look deeper at personal development in general. So I would love to know, if you're happy to share, like how did your imposter syndrome really affect you, like personally in your own well-being, like, and how did you cope with it?
It was mainly just so much self-doubt, and like that, it's like very common. It's this fear of being found out, that someone's going to sort of realize that actually you're not as good as they think you are, because like you touched on it there, like what there's a very common thing. It's called the imposter cycle. So when you have something like a promotion or anything where you need to perform, and people will either like over prepare, or they will sort of procrastinate, which is a form of self-handicapping. So you can sort of blame it on that if it doesn't go so well, but then they'll frantically prepare. They'll have the events, and they'll do well because they're not really imposters. And then there'll be like a really short period where they kind of feel relief. But then it's like what you touched on here is they fail to internalize success, which is like quite a major feature of it. So like you said, like you'll attribute things to anything else. So it will be like, oh, it's because I was a woman, it's because there was no one else, it was easy, rather than taking your own, like realizing it's down to you. And people are, if you really believe it, it's not like false modesty. And so because you fail to internalize the success, then you start feeling like an imposter, like, oh, I got the job because they felt sorry for me, or no one else applied. And then you have this feelings kind of perpetuated, and then you start the cycle again. And it is really that internalization of success is quite a fundamental part of it. For me, yeah, it was just anxiety, like really worrying, like, and then just constantly doing courses and thinking that it would be the answer. And so I think it's just, yeah, mainly like the stress. It's associated with anxiety and depression, self-doubt, and low self-esteem and burnout. So you can, like, if you're doing this over preparation, thinking you have to do so much more, you can't sustain that, so it leads to burnout. And so yeah, those are the major features of how it affected me. I'm more qualified now.
So interesting then. So how do you internalize success in a healthy way?
Well, it's basically like getting a bit, like being more clear on it. So with a lot of things, it's like this self-awareness, shining the light of awareness on things. So one way you might want to do it is to sort of write down your successes, and then trying to be much more objective. And you might I quite like the exercise. You have like a pie chart, and you can like write sort of the attributions of what has caused it, because it might be a few external factors, but it's largely going to be down to you, because you're going to continue to have these successes. And so it's like, yeah, getting clear on it, and asking yourself questions like there's also from like cognitive behavior therapy. There's the ABC, well, it's ABCDE method, but it's like, so A is the activating event. So it'd be sort of like something like you don't feel like you're good enough to be promoted. And then the B is your belief, and it's largely people's beliefs around situations that causes C, which is consequences. And that would be either sort of emotionally, so it's cognitively or behaviorally. So it could be sort of feeling like you don't deserve it. And then behaviorally, that could be you not applying for the job. And then so the DX part of it is looking for, it's basically you're going to it's D. It's disputing the belief. So it's basically getting really clear. So asking your things like, what is the evidence for that belief that you're not capable of this job? So what would your friends say? Like you said, your partner saying, well, absolutely go for it. So what would other people say? Is it logical? And being like, yeah, really looking for whether or not it's actually accurate. And also alternatives. So what else could it be? Could alternatively be that you are capable and they can see that in you. And so yeah, it's basically really getting clear on what is going on and whether or not it's true, or if it's your belief around it that's causing these other outcomes and those feelings.
That's so helpful, because the meanings we attach to anything create our emotions, right? They create the way we then experience the world around us. So if immediately we're like scared of being found out, scared of the shoe dropping, and scared the idea that perhaps you'll be presented with something you can't deal with, or something that you don't ever want to experience because maybe you've experienced something in the past. When as soon as we start attaching all of that, the pressure just builds, and that pressure just becomes literally a pressure cooker for us to explode, right? And that's where, unfortunately, when our clients come to work with us, unfortunately, that's where they've usually gotten to. They're at that point where the pressure's too much, and it is starting to affect, their relationships, their ability to apply for the position they want, or to go after that thing that is they want, and to be a better parent, things like that. And so the amount of parents, and I don't have kids, but the amount of parents that feel like they're imposters at being parents, like they just feel like, obviously, thing like most adults feel is like we're big kids just in these big adult bodies, but to then have a child to care for and to step up into that role, I think there's a bit of a disparity between the two, and it can be really challenging to challenge those beliefs, like you've said. So how does someone do that in your eyes? How does somebody challenge their beliefs when it comes to imposter syndrome? Now, I know that's very vague because we're not talking about a very specific example, but is there anything you could share to perhaps shed some light on that for anyone that's listening?
Well, it's like working with someone else so they can sort of ask the questions, like, how realistic is this belief? That's one way. There's an exercise. You need to kind of have someone that you really trust to do it with. It's called externalization of voices. And it's a bit based on like basically using the ABCDE method. So you get them to be your negative voice. And so they need to be quite aware of like what your thinking is. You can explain it to them. And you use that to practice like arguing with it. So it's so they will say the negative thing like, oh, you don't know enough to be in that job. And then you would say something like, well, I did this, this, and this. So it's a really good exercise. You can get better at sort of questioning those beliefs. So that, I think those are probably the two. Also, just sitting and trying to take some time out to be aware of your thoughts a bit more. So we obviously, our thoughts don't just happen automatically, and they're meant to, because otherwise if we had to attend to every single thing, then we wouldn't be able to get anything done and we'd be exhausted. So things like sort of mindfulness, meditation can really help, because you're taking that time just to quieten down. So I did another qualification on acceptance commitment therapy, and this is like a third wave behavior therapy. So rather than with like CBT, where you're trying to actively sort of change your thoughts and your beliefs, it's more about sort of creating space. And there's a really nice exercise. It's called cognitive diffusion, and it's basically when cognitive fusion is when your thoughts are reality in your mind, so they sort of fuse together. And the whole idea behind cognitive diffusion is splitting them apart again. And so you kind of, one of the exercises is, so you close down your eyes and you think about a thought. So it'd be like something like, I am stupid, or anything that like, you know, you've got that sort of attachment to. So it's like, first of all, you just replay that to yourself 10 times and really trying to get the emotion with it. And then the next one is like, you move, next stage is, I'm having the thought that I am stupid. So you're creating a little bit of space. So again, repeat it 10 times. And then it's, I notice that I'm having the thought that. And just by like going through that exercise, you sort of realize that we are not our thoughts, like they're not necessarily true. And just to create a little bit of distance from them. So that's a really nice exercise that I like.
Yeah, 100%, because it can be really consuming, can't it, when we have like that just those barrage of thoughts, then the feelings that become attached to that. And so creating that space is a really nice way, because it removes the pressure of trying to change it, like you said. And you know, I think just naturally it's a coping mechanism to want to control something and to be able to just change something. They just want to switch it off, and realistically we can't do that like in an instant, right? It takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of adapting, but we can't change anything. We can't have the illusion of control over anything until we can actually see it for what it is, not what we think it is or what we think it should be or shouldn't be. And I really love that, because, well, you said that acceptance and commitment, right? it's that acceptance of what is there, and then we actually then move forward from that place, which is far healthier, right? We talk with our clients about something like a pendulum, and it made me think of the imposter syndrome a little bit in terms of the way that some people experience it. And that is that we obviously have this pendulum. On either side, we've got like extreme negatives, like I hate myself, I can't do this, I shouldn't be here, I shouldn't be doing this. And that fear essentially just is like top level, right? And then the other side of the pendulum is almost like a false positivity. It's like a fake it till you make it. I can cope, I am confident, I'm capable, and you're just saying it, but you don't believe it. And it's almost like with imposter syndrome, I think there's just this constant like swinging backwards and forwards. And we have to find a way to come to that center point, so that we can acknowledge those feelings that are coming up, but also then move into alignment with what could actually be truth for us, so that we can step forward in a resourceful way. I wonder if you've got any insights as to how somebody might cope if they are swinging on that pendulum when it comes specifically to imposter syndrome.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I was reading a book, I think it's Dr. Julie Smith. She's like quite big on like TikTok and stuff. She's great. She's a clinical psychologist, and she was saying exactly that, like positive thinking doesn't work because you don't actually believe it. So you can say all the words in the world, if you don't believe something, all that you can say all the positive like affirmations in the world. If you're not actually believing them, then it's not. You know, your brain's not stupid, it will know. And so I think, and again, acceptance commitment therapy can be really good. And also there's an exercise in CBT within the ABCDE model. It's about like decatastrophizing, and it's like, even if this is true, what's the worst case scenario? Like, you know, because we get all into this idea, and again, it's our thought of, oh, it's the end of the world. If I can't do this job, then that's it. I'll lose my job, and then I'll like lose my house. You know, all these things. You just come into these worst case scenarios. If you can actually think like, okay, so what is the worst case scenario? Or maybe you have to go back to the other job, or you get some training, and you become like, you're not going to know everything just straight off the bat, you know. And I think that actually ties in quite nicely with one of the beliefs people have with imposter syndrome, is that other people don't have to work at things, that people are just excelling, and you know, they just find everything easy. And that's very much like that fixed mindset that Carol Dweck talked about. And you know, we can gain skills. You don't have to be able to do something perfectly with ease straight off the bat. So yeah, it's like just getting really clear on like, how bad is it if it is true. And also like the acceptance commitment therapy is the acceptance, like even if it is true, just being comfortable with that, and then again moving forwards, because if you're just panicking about something, it's going to stop you. Like everything is all about moving towards your goals. So if you're able to sort of accept that maybe in this situation you don't know everything, but okay, and it can, you know, you can work towards getting more skills, etc., so that you can develop and then move forward.
Yeah, nice. I think they're really, really insightful, and our listeners will definitely be able to, I think, pick those tips up and take them away and actually implement them, or at least reflect on them and think for themselves about the role that the imposter syndrome is playing in their lives, and then how could they apply the things that you just mentioned. Because one of them sparked my thinking of perfectionism. Obviously, that's a huge part of imposter syndrome, right? It's like we want everything to be perfect and we'll just keep going. Might never get anything done because we're trying to get everything perfect. And I've definitely been on waves of that on my journey, and it's not always been the case, but I've suddenly become aware of when it's kicking in and when it's time to put it down. And I think of the 80-20 rule. Is like, okay, 20% of my effort is going to bring me 80% of my results, and I know my 20%, because of that drive of probably a bit of imposter syndrome in there, is fueling my 20%. It's probably more than the average 20% anyway. So I'm probably doing way over 100% if I was comparing. And that in itself isn't particularly healthy, because there is still that comparable piece. But it really helped me to be able to put things down and know when to stop and just put something out into the world, and just see what happens, and let go of any attachment to it as well.
Yeah, well, I think you're right, that saying, isn't it? Done is better than perfect, and perfection doesn't exist. And I think that's probably, there's sort of different components to imposter syndrome, and one of them is fear of failure. And it's they kind of associate like shame and things like that with failing. And also, even though we all know that everyone's felt, you know, Richard Branson, you touched on before, he's like said, like, you know, I've got all these businesses that didn't work. Like, it's not really failure if you keep going. And it's because of that people have this sort of perfectionist tendencies, because it's also like having that feeling that if I fail, then I am a failure as a person, rather than I just didn't complete that particular thing and maybe that wasn't right. So yeah, it's like realizing that it's not you as a human being, like it is just a specific event or a task that didn't go like how you wanted it to. And again, it's like coming back to that kind of, it's like an irrational belief, and it's like, yeah, changing that to something more positive, like, yes, I didn't do so well at this, but that's okay. And again, into that growth thing of you know, one failure you can develop. It's not the end. It's not you still are capable of achieving things in the future.
Exactly. And it's really obviously heavy linked, isn't it, to identity, right? Who we are, how we're showing up versus how we think we're showing up, and who it is we really are. And one of the things that's helped me massively was to question myself in a non-BS way, being completely honest with myself as to where am I walking my talk and where am I not in my life. And as soon as I actually started to ask myself that question on a regular basis, I've been able to walk my talk better than I'd ever have in my entire life. And that's probably been over the last maybe 4 years, I would say. Don't get me wrong, like, doesn't mean that everything's absolutely perfect, but by a long shot. But the reality is, like, when I question that and I hold myself accountable for where I am actually walking my talk or not, and I'll also try to get the feedback of people's opinions that I really respect, that will be really honest as well. Now, I won't do that every time, because I'll ask myself that question, where am I walking my talk, like on a weekly basis now. Originally, it was more about one time, do a reflection, where am I almost having an expectation that other people would do this thing and I'm not doing it. And it's like, whoa, that's awful. And that's the one thing that I would hate, and I still hate, about mentorship and self-help gurus and things like this, is because, like, you see on one hand they're saying one thing and they're doing the opposite. And that was one of the reasons why when we set up Wellness Theory, it was like, no, like, we're never going to be like that. Doesn't mean we're going to be perfect, but it means that we're going to strive as best we can with where we are on our journeys to do it to the best of our ability, whether that is to do breath work on a regular basis, whether that is to do journaling on a regular basis. And from there, I've been able to learn what it is I need and what's authentic to me. Because otherwise, it's very easy for somebody listening to potentially go on social media, listen to a few different people and be like, right, this is the morning routine I have to do. This is the evening routine I have to do. And then I won't be an imposter anymore. Then I'll have it figured out. Then I'll feel this way. Right. And I think we have to get to a point where we say, okay, well, I'm going to try this routine, or I'm going to try this thing that this expert is saying is really good, but then I'm going to see how I respond to it. And if that's authentic to me or not. And then if that's authentic to me and I can do this thing, well, now that creates more evidence, right? Like you said earlier, the belief change is for us, okay, well, if I've got evidence to support that I do this with my emotions, or I do this with my mindset, if I do this with this project that I'm working on, if I do this in that interaction, then you start to build more evidence that you can trust. And I think when we can start to trust ourselves, the imposter just shrinks that little bit more.
Yeah, well, it's like building that sort of self-belief, isn't it? But yeah, it's like what we're all very individual. So what works for one person isn't going to work for another. And like, yeah, I think you touched on their social media. It's like it's like you've got all these comparisons. You think that everyone's got everything soft and like sorted, and I think people are being more open about certain things. There was a study by, I think it was Matthews and Imes, and two psychologists, and they said like people just being aware that imposter syndrome was something, what it was enough to help people reduce it. Because I think you said before, when you aren't aware of it, you really believe it even more. But yeah, I think working out what works for you, and building trust that way, and really starting to again tune into yourself rather than listening to other people. Because I think if you try something that doesn't work, that's another kind of knock, isn't it? You're like, oh well, why didn't it work for them? So it didn't work for me. So I must be an imposter. I can't even do this right, kind of thing.
Exactly. And it's also interesting, right? Because it's like we've got this like narrative obviously going on within ourselves, but there is this like unspoken narrative that's happening with somebody else that's almost like potential competition. Like we said about like the promotion example at the beginning. It's like, why on earth would I believe that there's somebody else that could do that better than me when I've got all of the evidence to say so? But if I didn't have that comparative way of thinking in the first place, it's like I wouldn't probably never have needed to have even gone through that thought process. So sometimes we're also comparing to no one, right? Like it's okay, I'm not good enough. Okay, compared to what? Compared to who? Compared to what situation? Until we get really specific, it's like shining the spotlight on the boogeyman under the bed, right? As soon as you put the light on, it disappears. And so I'm curious to know, like, why do you call them imposter monsters? Because like that really intrigues me with the whole turn the light on, the boogeyman's gone.
Yeah, I think I actually like stole it from someone else, but it was it Glenn Carson from Den on his he talked about it on his podcast, and I just like really like the idea of it, because it's like, if you can create it into like, rather than, obviously you can't necessarily get rid of it completely, and you might be able to use it to your advantage, but I like the idea of like a cuddly, like in Monsters Inc., like a cuddly monster, and then if you can make friends with it, and like just realize that actually it's not scary, and it might actually have helped you in the past. Like for me, that obviously it did hold me back a lot in like, well, it's more that it caused me a lot of stress and anxiety, but it spurred me on to deepen my knowledge, so I'm now much more qualified. So yeah, it's just about kind of making friends with it, and kind of realizing that it's there, it might stay there, but just not letting it scare you and hold you back. So that's why I like that kind of idea.
Exactly, in it together, right? I love that. Because it's so easy, isn't it, to add that layer of self-judgment to obviously ourselves, but to the monster, right? To that voice in your head. And it's very easy to almost create a sense of separation. That's the imposter syndrome. That's not me. Actually, I think we do have to say, hey, listen, it is me. We're in this together. You're my little monster. Come here, give you a hug. Now, where's the evidence to show that, we are connected, and that actually perhaps it's not such a big thing as to what we think it is. I think that only comes when we start to learn compassion, like really in the true meaning of the word, doesn't it?
Exactly.
All right. So listen, Jenny, I really want to ask you a couple of questions from our community. So, well, depending on some of the topics that we have, we obviously throw out, the opportunity to our community to ask questions to the guests that we have coming on. And there's two actually that I really want you to dive into. And I think we've probably already touched upon them in some ways. The first one is is there any way to actually identify if you are being A, your most authentic self, or B, the version of you that requires more of the fake it till you make it type of person?
Well, I guess one way you could do is to look at your values. This is another sort of exercise that you can do. Enough commitment therapy again. So basically, what's important to you, or what are you doing that's actually what you think you should be doing? And so basically, you can get them. You can probably find them online, or if anyone wants me to send them to them, I can. And it's basically you have like a list of values, and then you have to put them. I think you're allowed 10. So you've got ones that are important, very important, quite important, not that important, and then you put them all like kind of underneath. It's nice to have them printed out, like as a visual. And then of the 10 the most important, I think you have to pick 5. I can't remember exactly. Anyways, when you have like your values, when you're clear of what's important to you, then you can see if are you living your life in line with your values. Because if you're not, it creates a cognitive dissonance. So if it's something like, if health is one of your top values and you're sort of smoking or drinking heavily, you've got this horrible feeling that you're not living how you should be. So that can be a really good way. So yeah, I think that's quite a nice exercise that you can do.
Super powerful as well, right? Our values, we're always banging on about values on the podcast with our clients. So any of our clients listening, here she goes again. Values, like they're so important for us, right? To know if we're living in alignment or not. We'll feel the consequences if we're not. And if we are. So if we are not aware of them in the first place, how can we possibly really know if we're being truly authentic or not? And then that allows us to be more intentional with our development in that area. So like the question there said, like, am I identifying if I am being my most authentic self, or the version of me that requires me to fake it till I make it? It's like, okay, well, if you know what you value, and you know that you are, let's say, valuing health, and you know all of the things you value around health, then even if you have to try 100 different ways to be healthier, you're still moving in alignment towards your authentic self, even if it feels like you're faking it a little bit in the beginning, right? So it's almost like you've got to walk that path of fake it till you make it to some extent, to be able to find out what you like, what you don't like, what resonates with you and what doesn't. And it's so funny, you mentioned at the beginning about imposter syndrome showing up in fitness when you first got into the fitness space. Obviously, our listeners know I've spent a long time in the fitness space, obviously before wellness theory. And that was something that always felt a little bit out of alignment for me, not working in the industry like that. I loved it, and I still really love the industry and everything that it stands for to some extent. And for me, though, I worked in a lot of gyms. And I did not love the gym at all, And it took me leaving the gym environment to really realize that I'd fallen out of love with my own health and fitness, because I was just in that environment all of the time. As soon as I stepped out of it, I got a passion for the gym again, right? And I got a passion for actually working out and doing more strength training and things like that. That could be just spend a certain amount of time in a certain place, need a bit more variety and that kind of stuff. But I think for me, it's actually, no, what I value about being healthy and about being fit is my ability to be able to challenge myself, my ability to be able to be outside, is to be able to do big things that I've always wanted to do. And I just wasn't getting that from being in a gym environment solely. So there was always this like conflict going on. And I guess there would have been definitely a bit of imposter syndrome when it comes to certain things. Like I used to teach the level 2s and level 3s personal trainers coming up, and we had a fitness education business as well alongside wellness theory, where we would teach CPD courses to fitness professionals. And on some of those courses, obviously we're teaching about like strength training, resistance training, and all these other different ways of being healthy and well, right, and fitness. And obviously, like, I knew what I was talking about because I was delivering it. I've been doing it for so long, but I just wasn't passionate about it. And that lack of passion made the imposter switch on a little bit more. It was like, just because I don't love it doesn't mean I'm an imposter. Just because I'm not going to the next CrossFit competition, or I'm not doing the next Spartan race, doesn't mean I'm an imposter. It just meant that I have different values associated with my health and fitness. So it's really important that you brought that up, and I really, really want to make sure our listeners heard it, because like our values are just so critical, especially when it comes to us being our authentic selves or not.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. I remember when I my two of my like kind of top, well, health obviously, but autonomy and knowledge are actually two of my sort of top values. And it's funny, I was like thinking, like when I worked sort of in an office, I was like, no wonder I hated it so much, because I didn't have autonomy. Like I had to be there at certain hours, and the worst thing was is that when I didn't have anything to do, it was being stuck in an office on a sunny day when it was when I didn't have it was a waste of my time. And so now so obviously work probably a lot more hours, but because I'm passionate, it's on my own terms. It's I have that passion, and it doesn't feel like painful. And also on that is like when I was working as a personal trainer, and I don't know if people know, a lot of listeners probably doing this, but a lot of personal trainers are actually really unhealthy because the hours are brutal when you start. Like I was getting up at sort of 5:30 in the morning for my morning clients. Then I'd probably finish at like 9 p.m. relying on naps. And then for a part of it, I was working in a gym in where I'm based, and then traveling to central London to teach Pilates. And I was exhausted. Like even my own exercise kind of went out the window because I was just so tired. And I was like, this is ridiculous. Like my clients are getting healthier than me because my job is making me unhealthy because of just how it's sort of laid out. So I had to make changes to get back into alignment and be healthy again. And yeah, so yeah, it definitely, life feels easier when you're living in, like you're in line with your values 100%.
Definitely. It's interesting, isn't it, that the workplace can often contradict that as well. I mean, one of the reasons why Jonathan's not on this podcast with us today doing this interview is because at the moment he's working on a passion project, and he's opening up a new health facility here in Abu Dhabi on Yas Island. And one of the obviously things of doing that is creating what does the model look like for the staff, like, and because again, one of our pet hates about the fitness industry is the way trainers specifically, but other departments as well, end up burning out and don't end up giving their best to clients, or they do, but they suffer at the expense, and it's horrible. So one of the things that we've been working on is creating a model where trainers can actually earn a really good income and not kill themselves in the process. It can still be a role model, and then they get rewarded for that rather than rewarded for the number of hours they do, the number of sessions they deliver, and things like that. And I understand it because I've seen that industry from many different perspectives, from an operational perspective, from a product perspective, from a national perspective. I've seen it from all the different ways, so I understand how the industry has got there, and I'm talking obviously commercial fitness. However, it's missing the point of what is true for the industry and what it needs, and for it to actually have any longevity in it, and to really have the impact that gyms say they want to make, right, and help people be fitter and healthier and so on. It's like, okay, well, it starts at home. Right, like how are we treating our staff, how are we treating ourselves in this process? And obviously that's probably one of the reasons why we do what we do, right? And yourself as well, Jenny, in terms of going into workplaces and seeing the impacts, that general well-being and burnout is obviously playing its part, but also imposter syndrome. I'd love for you actually to just jump in there and perhaps share, how are you seeing imposter syndrome playing out in the workplace when it comes to well-being?
Well, for burnout, because people are thinking they have to put so much more work in, like the perfectionist tendencies, people even like holding themselves back and not going for jobs that they are perfectly capable. I saw a statistic recently. It was like, so first of all, to say like imposter syndrome affects men and women equally. So it started off, they thought it was just women, and the initial research was just on high achieving women, but it's both. But I saw a statistic, and it was something like men will apply for a job if they've got like a percentage of a job description. Women will only apply if they have every single thing on that job description. So yeah, it's stopping people from progressing in their careers because they feel like, oh, I'm not good enough. I'm not capable of this promotion, or people in the promotions doubting themselves, feeling really stressed, and yeah, that stress and anxiety basically.
Yeah. It's something, isn't it, that's so interesting when you start looking at gender. I wonder if, again, I'm really not sure because we haven't spoken about this before, like prior to this interview or anything like that, but how masculine and feminine energy influence imposter syndrome. Do you know much about that at all?
No, they haven't done enough studies really, like comparing them. I mean, they've said like the main studies that I've seen, it's just been like looking at the prevalence and saying like, oh no, it is. So some say, oh no, it's actually more men. Some say, oh, it's more women. But no, I think that's something that'd be really interesting to look at and
Yeah.
like compare and contrast kind of thing.
Definitely, and especially to look at like the energy side of it, because obviously not all women would necessarily fall into how you described it in terms of like having 100%, right? Like for me, being in that male environment in the fitness space, like my masculine energy was way out of balance to my feminine energy. So I was able to adopt more of a kind of a focused, almost like disciplined, structured perspective when it came to certain things. And in many ways, that's been extremely helpful for me. In other ways, that's meant that I've needed to really lean into feminine energy and how that influences everything. And this is literally, I'm just spouting now because I haven't thought about this until literally just now. But I wonder if that plays a part in imposter syndrome, because obviously when we're more in that feminine energy, we tend to welcome our emotions a lot more. And then we start having the feelings that are attached to that fixed sort of structured mindset as well. So I wonder if there's any kind of balance that needs to happen from an energetic standpoint in order to be able to really start to heal and to get closer to our imposter monster in a healthier way.
That's a really interesting point. I think that's something I might start doing a study on it myself. I was thinking about doing a PhD on it, and then after the MSc, I was like, I just need a break from academia for a bit. Definitely something I would like to like delve into a bit more and have the freedom to do that kind of study.
Yeah, it's super interesting, super interesting. But again, I think you can go too far down the rabbit hole on something, right? And I think there's much simpler ways to obviously address something like imposter syndrome or the imposter phenomenon, like you said. So let me lean into another question from our community. So the question was, how do I overcome the negative feelings that come with imposter syndrome? And what tips do you have to become more confident in my authenticity, skills, and satisfied with outcomes? Because sometimes I feel like I'm not giving my all or my best, or I don't trust myself.
Ooh, that's a good question.
So
the first,
yeah, I was going to say, let's break it down, shall we? So how to overcome negative feelings that come with it? Perhaps let's start there.
I think, well, there's a very common, well, we all kind of do it, is we try and push away what we class as like negative emotions. And like, first of all, it's like realizing that, you know, emotions are just emotions and they're there like to kind of tell us something. And it's because we're like so desperate to like only kind of experience what we class as like the good. And I think again, it's like that, the acceptance side of the ACT sort of methodology is sort of just sitting with it and just allowing it there to be rather than trying to change anything. And like you'll notice, like, you know, emotions and feelings, they're very transient. They don't last that long. It's actually only when we try and push them down that's when like we kind of get problems. So first of all, I would say, yeah, just allowing yourself to sit with them for a bit and then just see how it feels. And you know, there's certain exercises, you know, like closing down your eyes and like, you know, feeling where it is in your body. If it's got like kind of colors, which I can never have any of that, but you know, some people do, shape, color, and just like getting really just allowing it to be there and see what happens, I think would be like a good starting point.
100%, and I can relate to that massively. So I was very dissociated when it comes to my emotions, past history and things like that in the mix, and I found it very hard to associate with my emotions. And so when somebody said like, how do you feel, unless I was like 10 out of 10 raging about something, or there was like this heightened emotion, I wouldn't be able to name what the feeling was. So I'm good, I'm okay, like I'm fine, sort of thing. And actually that was absolute BS, because everything come to a complete head and just started to feel every emotion under the sun all at once, which is not fun. So anyone that's listening to this, like, let's not wait till it gets to that point. Let's sit with those emotions. And it's funny because as I was reading that, the question literally is how to overcome negative feelings, right? And if we just look at the language, it's like, let them come over. It says literally the answer is in the question. right? That let them come over, let your emotions come in, experience them, let yourself feel them. You don't have to indulge in them. But like you said earlier on about thoughts, is we can create some space with them. We can just observe them without judging them. And that in itself actually helps us to overcome them. And I think if we're already asking the question, we've probably already overlooked the feeling.
Yeah, there's if people are like sort of struggling with like sort of working out what they're feeling, there's the emotion wheel. You can probably like Google it. It's just like a wheel, and there's much more nuance to emotions rather than like the sort of anxiety, stress, or happy. And it's just a nice way you can look at it if you are sort of struggling, like when you're sitting there trying to like think about how you're feeling, maybe just look at the wheel so you can kind of like, oh yeah, it's more of that. And there's an exercise, I can send it to you to make it sort of available. It's called, I think it's called Colouring for Clarity. It's like a mandala, and you can use that to help you kind of connect with your emotions a little bit.
Nice, I love that. Awesome, perfect. So any of our listeners that are listening and want that, just let us know. We'll make sure that you get it for sure. All right, so the second part of the question there was any tips to become more confident in my authenticity skills and to be satisfied with outcomes. So we've already talked a little bit about authenticity, haven't we, with like values, knowing what they are, questioning where you walk in your talk, where are you not. Is there anything else you'd add to the authenticity part?
No, I think we've touched, I think the values are probably like the best way to kind of do that.
Definitely. I think that's like your biggest bang for your buck. Values.
Yeah.
Put some time and energy into one of the activities, that's the one. Cool. So how to become more confident in my skills and to be satisfied with outcomes.
Yeah, so I think confidence comes out of pushing yourself out of like your comfort zone, or if people say that. So you don't get confident by doing the same things. So there's a thing called, it's like you've got your sort of your comfort zone, and then you've got your stretch zone, and then you've got your panic zone. And so we want to be doing things that are like outside of your comfort zone. So if you find like it's not creating any challenge, then you're in your comfort zone. So it's doing things that putting yourself out there a little bit, but not so much that you go into the panic zone where you're going to be, it's too much. So if like you're scared of public speaking, maybe try and do a talk in front of 2 or 3 people rather than trying to do it to an event of like hundreds. So it's like small, just enough to make you feel uncomfortable. And then once you get comfortable there, that becomes your comfort zone, and then you keep moving it out. So I think, by doing is the best way to build confidence. And for the more happy with your achievements, I think it's, again, coming back to that, looking at it and maybe discussing it with someone else. Like, I think it's very easy to, and it's something that people believe, that if you can do something, people think that it must be easy, and they forget that all of like everything that's gone into them as a person. Like, other people haven't had your experiences, they haven't read all the books that you've read, they haven't done all the things that you have done. So it's very easy to discount your own abilities. So I think like speaking to someone that you really trust and like asking them and sort of getting other people's feedback can be good, because seeing it through a different lens, or just taking time to write down like all the things that you've done and trying to get really real on how impressive that really is. And like, anyone else, like we sort of said before, could anyone else actually do that, or could they do it as well as you could? So I think, as with a lot of things, it's like just trying to trying to be a bit more objective, take a step back and seeing it from like someone else's point of view.
Nice, I love that. And it's so critical what you said there as well. It's like, somebody else probably could do it, and they could probably do it really, really well, but they're still going to do it in their unique way, in the same way you're going to do it in your unique way, right? And that both are okay. It's just then the confidence to then be the one that follows through or not. And I think that is really, really important with what you said there about like experience and doing, and like edging out of your comfort zone, so that we don't get into that kind of danger zone or the panic zone. And I think from there, like you said, like, when we have experience, we have new evidence, right? And there was something I saw, I think it was early today, actually. It was like, if we have experience, that then turns to wisdom, and then wisdom helps us to have confidence. And that's where we start to move into this healthier loop, where we have more evidence that shows, actually, do you know what, we can do this thing, or we are this kind of person. The easier it then becomes to actually do it.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's some great tips there already straight off the bat. There was one thing that somebody also said, And they shared an example of kind of how they have experienced imposter syndrome. And that was that they successfully held down and excelled in what most people would call like an alpha male industry, right? So military, martial arts, bodyguarding, being a doorman, fitness, all of that kind of thing. So very alpha male dominant things. So, but then inside he like really craves like that love and the peace and the softness, and he doesn't like any kind of conflict, right? He feels like it's like a massive paradox, and therefore that's when his imposter syndrome strikes. So what would you say to somebody that's experiencing that right now and sees that as a conflict?
Well, I think again, it kind of comes into maybe living like not in line with your values if you're valuing sort of softness. But yeah, I think maybe get clear on what's important to you, and if that means walking away from the things that if they don't feel like they're in line with your values, then yeah, maybe making some changes to that. Or if you can do both, like if they're both important, you know, you can have two. It's just making space for them. You can have, you know, you can have two different sides to you. So again, just taking a step back and, you know, allowing yourself to feel those emotions and see what, you know, if it's something that you need to change, or if it's something you just need to make space for within yourself to have the two together.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's my line of thinking as well. I was like, those things can coexist, right? It's completely okay to have kind of like the alpha side of you wanting to come out, and then a softer side of you to come out. Like that's completely okay. Those two things can work in tandem, and very often actually the true like alpha states come with softness, right? They actually, that is part of the embodiment of one person, right? Because again, we all have all of these tendencies, all of these traits. It's just how in which are they showing up in our lives, in our behavior, in our thoughts, in our emotions, in our day-to-day, in our relationships. If we can start to embody all the things that are true for us, I think that's where we can have the confidence that we're being authentic. But like you said, you know, we have to shine light on it. First of all, see, okay, what is important? What is that? How is it playing out in my life? And how can we actually then integrate the two, rather than perhaps live in the perception that they can't be one and the same? Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, it's like yin and yang, isn't it? Like, you know, you've got to have the both. And like, it's really funny because I remember like a yoga teacher sort of saying, like, even though like a lot of people think like yoga soft, it's not. If you're doing like power yoga, all this stuff, it's very yang. And like, so even though you're doing yoga, you're still like in the masculine. And I think yin has come around a lot. I did a yoga course. It was amazing. It was called mandala. So you move around the mat like in a circle, so you face the back, what have you. But you open and close the practice with yin, and it was really nice to have the two together. Because yeah, because I know a lot of people are drawn towards the like really like rocket yoga. It's very intense, and kind of going back into like that softer side, so you can have both, is really important.
It's so interesting that you mentioned like yin and yang in from a yoga perspective, because like yin yoga is something that I lean into. You know, I mentioned earlier about like being more in that masculine energy and being dissociated from emotions and things like that. One of the fastest ways for me to reconnect with my softer side and to slow down a bit of that ambition that just keeps me going, I bring myself back to the yoga mat. I literally, you can see like behind the yoga mat is there, so that throughout my workday I pause so I can go and just stretch and open and sort of come back to my center a bit, like between appointments and different projects that we're working on and stuff, because it really helps me to physically obviously connect, but also well, you know, it's got like so many other benefits, right, in terms of our flexibility, our mindset, our emotions. There's so many benefits there, but the yin really helps me to lean into that softer part rather than that kind of alpha side of myself that does come out to play as well. So to the person that asked that question in the community, you know, perhaps maybe start looking at different ways in which you can have your body help you in integrating these two things together. That could be really useful for you as well, particularly because I know the person that asked that question is something that's very active, very physical, so that I think that could be really useful. So Jenny, tell us, what are you seeing? So obviously I'd love for you to explain a little bit more about what it is you actually do when you're working with clients, and also perhaps any kind of mistakes or anything that you're noticing that people are making when it comes to imposter syndrome. Is there anything you're seeing out there?
Yeah, so I've been working with people sort of one-to-one, sort of depending on the individual and sort of where they're at. So combining sort of like the CBT, the cognitive behavior therapy with the acceptance commitment therapy and a few other techniques, and just to like help them kind of realize a challenge or just accept the beliefs around being an imposter. I think like probably the biggest mistake is people thinking that they can completely sort of, well, trying to get rid of it. I think like you're not, it's always going to be there. Like self-doubt is a normal, most people have self-doubt at some point. Another point is though that there is a difference between self-doubt and imposter syndrome. I see it a lot online, and it's not when you do something new that you've never done before, because then it's self-doubt and that's totally normal. It's when you've got all this evidence to the contrary, but because of that failure to internalize, then you always doubt your ability. So that's the slight the difference. But yeah, I think it's trying to get rid of it completely and then thinking that they failed when they haven't. So I think it's like another, oh, I imposter it, trying to get rid of my imposter syndrome. So yeah, I think that's probably the main ones.
Amazing. It's funny you say that, like, because there's one thing that I've seen as a bit of a common thread, and I haven't done any like major research on this. This is really, again, what I've experienced through working with different clients, is almost the need for it. There's a secondary gain, right, to having imposter syndrome. Almost like, and it's been said to me this way, is that it helps to keep me humble. It helps to keep me in my lane.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to know your thoughts on that.
Well, I guess it depends if it's holding you back or not. Like if it is, because obviously you don't want to get arrogant, because I think the problem is like, you know, if once you start questioning yourself and you get arrogant, then that's when you start making mistakes. And then I always find it's really funny. It's like the people who have the confidence to go for these jobs that they're not qualified for, then they're the ones that they get into the positions and then they're not actually very capable, but they've got this massive self-belief. So I think, yeah, it has got its place, but it's when it's causing you a lot of stress and anxiety, and it's maybe holding you back from sort of going for jobs, then it needs to be addressed. But I mean, if it's just a little bit of self-doubt that's just keeping you in check, then I think it's quite healthy.
Yeah, and I think that's something that people need to question themselves, right? Because it's one thing to have some form of suffering to help you stay humble. Yeah. It's like there's a fine line between that, and we have to at some point take responsibility and think, okay, are there any other ways that I could maintain my humility and not suffer, right? Because often exactly. Question we ask ourselves, and actually we could probably ask it for many different things in our lives, and I think it's something that's just perhaps worth considering. But I love the distinction you made between self-doubt and imposter syndrome, because it's almost like the way we talk about stress. You know, there's a healthy stress that pushes us and drives us and we need it to thrive, and then there's this unhealthy stuff, right? Unhealthy stress that just taints our lives in the most hideous ways that we really don't want to experience. And I think it's really essential to learn where that line is for ourselves. Is there any tips that you could give for somebody that's struggling to perhaps find that line between self-doubt and imposter syndrome?
I guess it would be just like sort of having a think about your successes and thinking, right, are you sort of attributing this to something else outside of yourself? And or are you, another thing people do is they don't realize their achievements. So if you could have like, again, just like try and have some time out just to get really clear on it. Like, do you attribute things externally to your success? Then that's probably that it's more than the imposter syndrome side. If you're just doing something completely new that of course you don't have the confidence for, then that's probably more self-doubt. You can kind of ask yourself those questions.
Yeah, nice. I love that. And it's interesting. He said it's like attributing things to outside influences, because one of the things that I noticed for myself was, if somebody else said I could do it, I was more likely to believe it. And it's that whole thing. It's like, as soon as I felt like I had someone that believed in me, it almost gave me permission to believe in myself. And that's happened in many different areas of life as well over the years. And I think that's also something important, that we do have a support network that can be really honest with us, right? And that we are open and to be honest about as well, and honest with, because I think another thing with imposter syndrome is we get a bit scared to ask questions, and we get a bit scared to put ourselves out there. Right? Like for me, like I didn't want to ask for help when I was struggling emotionally. So I was that go-to person for everyone else. It's like, so what am I going to say like to them? It's like, one, did I trust that they could help me? And actually the answer was no. And I needed a different kind of support network at that time. But also, like, I had to find the courage to be able to ask for that, to be able to then create that network of people who had that shared belief. So it's almost like I had to borrow somebody else's belief before I could really believe it and see the evidence for myself. And I'm curious to know actually if that's common.
Yeah, I think so. Because I think that happens in a lot of kind of friendship things. You're always the one that supports everyone else, but you don't feel like you can ask for help yourself. And it could, like, I guess, tie into that fear of failure of imposter syndrome, in that you're showing like weakness. Like if people know that you need support, then you're showing that you kind of failed, or that they find out that you are an imposter or something like that. But yeah, it's definitely being able to reach out to people is the best way to kind of get help with anything, really, isn't it? And having the confidence to do so.
Definitely. And that's one of the reasons why I love this podcast so much. And that's one of the reasons I actually love social media, as much as there's a lot of things I don't love about it. I love that people share their stories, because I think it gives other people permission to do the same. And like, I don't know that we've ever put out a video, maybe early maybe early years of social media, almost like showing up on camera when we didn't really want to because we had to and stuff like that. Now it's like, no. Like, I'm not in the headspace for that. I don't have the capacity for that right now. Whether that be because we're just busy work-wise, whether that be because actually emotionally that like I'm not in the right space to be on camera, and all these kinds of stuff. You know, it's like there wasn't enough people when we first started out, I think, doing that, which is why it took a while for it to be so much more authentic now, and to be able to share anything and everything. So it's like, well, you're the person that helps other people. It's like, well, yeah, that doesn't mean I'm perfect. It means I'm human.
Yeah.
And as soon as again, like, you just start to attract more and more people that resonate with authenticity. And so I really, really love the topic of being authentic. And I think imposter syndrome really ties into that. We did an event actually at the end of last year. So every year we do a big event called Become a Force for Good, and we have a different theme every year, and it's all kind of like a charity gig, and it's really cool. We get like great speakers and this kind of stuff. And the whole thing was about living authentically. How do we live consciously, authentically, and abundantly? That was our event last year. And one of the best pieces of feedback we got from it was that every single speaker just shared themselves pretty much like raw and real as they come, and shared how being authentic has actually helped them to do and to be who it is they are today, and the positive effect that's had. Because there's so much out there, I think, on social media in particular. I feel like I'm giving social media a bit of battering today, but I'm not. I do love it to some extent. But it, you know, it does. It tells you need an avatar. It tells you need this filter. You need that. You need to say it like this. If you're going to post on LinkedIn, you need to do it like that. If you need to do it on Instagram, you've got to do it like this. And it's just like, come on. Like, at what point do we just like put a stake in the ground and say, well, I'm just going to do me and see how that goes? Because I promise, as soon as you do you, like, the rest just starts to fall into place. That's what I've noticed.
Well, yeah, I think when you're not living authentically, it's exhausting, isn't it? Because you're constantly having to put on this mask, and yeah, it's just not natural. So it's only so long you can keep on like creating this sort of reality that doesn't exist before you just think, oh, you know what? No, I'm just gonna just do me. It's much easier.
Exactly. So just on to another little thought, and I'm aware of the time now, but the statement "fake it till you make it." What's your opinion on that?
I guess depends, because it's, if you're faking it to make it, then that means that you're not. It depends, doesn't it? Because it means that, are you faking it but you're actually capable, or are you actually, is it in the terms of you're in a new situation where you don't know the answers and you're going to try, and then until you do succeed, in which case that's just how people kind of do things. That's how you progress. That's you getting out of your comfort zone, isn't it? You're trying new things to build confidence. So if it's down that route, then I think that's fine, because you're in that stretch zone, hopefully not in the panic zone, in which case then you will develop the skills, and then it will be the reality. You will have made it. If it's, you think you're faking it, but actually you're completely capable, and it's just the imposter syndrome like being there, then in that case, then it's not going to help, because you need to address why you think that you're faking it.
Exactly, right? Because I share a very similar opinion for sure, because like we get asked that quite often, certain things, because one of the questions I always ask clients when they first come to work with us is like, can you pretend, could you just pretend for a moment what it would look like by the time you finish coaching, like by the time you've achieved the thing that it is you want to achieve, or transformed in the way you want to transform, like, can you imagine it? Can you pretend? Can you sort of like fake it a bit? And as soon as they say yes, it's like, okay, so you've already got that already exists within you, right? Otherwise you wouldn't be able to imagine it. You wouldn't be able to pretend it. It becomes a problem if you're a surgeon and you're in the, surgery room, and you're all gloved up and you've got no idea what you're doing. That's a different kind of fake it till you make it, I think. That is absolutely not good. But I think sometimes if we can give ourselves permission to see what comes up when we are doing something new, right? Like when imposter syndrome shows up, okay, little monster's there, you're sitting there, you've got your arm around him now because you're being compassionate, right? He's welcome. You invited everything to come on over, all the feelings and everything. But now you get to actually say, okay, well, what if we was just going to pretend that we could, what would that look like? How would I show up? What would I do? How would that feel authentic to me? If we can start to have that dialogue, I think then maybe we can give ourselves permission to live more comfortably with imposter syndrome.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that.
All right, listen, Jenny. So one more question. She says, until something else pops into my head.
Yeah.
Okay, if you now could go back to speak to the Jenny that was suffering from stress and anxiety from imposter syndrome, if you go back and whisper in her ear, what would you say to her now, knowing what you know now?
Well, it's difficult because I kind of think it's, like we said before, it has kind of helped me in a way, because it's spurred me on to deepen my knowledge. But then again, knowledge is one of my top values, so I think I probably would have done that anyway. I still do it just because I love learning. So I think it would just be that you don't know absolutely everything, and because I get interested in a lot of different things, I'm never going to be the expert in anything. Well, imposter syndrome, but I'm constantly like, oh, I want to learn about this. So and if you want to be the expert on something and know everything about it, you have to study one thing, and that needs to be your thing, and that's just not my personality. So it's like, even though I didn't know absolutely everything, which is also impossible, I did know enough to help people, and that was all that was important. And I wish I just had the confidence in my ability to help people and focused on that, rather than thinking about everything that I didn't know.
That's a really interesting perspective as well, isn't it? As soon as we stop shining the light on ourselves and turn it to, okay, what do I have now that can actually help? Or that just changed the game, doesn't it, completely?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, nice. Jenny, thank you so much, my lovely, for coming on the podcast and having this conversation. Where can our listeners come and follow you and find out more about you?
Yeah, well, I'm on Instagram. It's Jenny C Devonshire, or Pause to Perform, with a numerical 2. And my website is www.pause, again, numerical 2 perform.co, or you can find me Jenny Devonshire on LinkedIn. So those are probably the main ones.
Amazing. We'll put all of those links as always into the show notes. Jenny, is there anything else that you feel like our listeners need to hear today before we say goodbye?
Just remember to take some time to allow your emotions to be there, and to not let yourself get caught up in believing that your thoughts are necessarily true. Try and allow yourself to kind of create that space So you can kind of have a little bit more of an awareness of what you're thinking in terms of, or anything really. So yeah, just take some time just to sit with everything and allow it to be.
Beautiful, beautiful. Amazing. Thank you so much, Jenny, and I look forward to potentially bring you back on the podcast again at a later date.
Perfect. Thanks so much for having me.